Have you ever had an eerie encounter that left you questioning reality? Well, let me take you along on a chilling journey that happened to me on the third day of the Lunar New Year. It started off like any other night of celebration, but ended with something I'll never forget. It was late, somewhere around 1 a.m., when I was riding my motorbike back home. The streets were deserted, and the only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the occasional bark of a distant dog. I was just a few kilometers from my neighborhood, riding through a dark, empty road. The trees on either side of the road swayed gently, casting eerie shadows under the dim streetlights. All of a sudden, an icy chill ran down my spine, something I couldn't explain. My hands went cold, even though I was wearing my gloves. I tried to ignore it, assuming it was just the wind or my exhaustion playing tricks on me. Then in the distance I saw her, a young woman standing by the side of the road, waving at me. She wore a white dress, and on her back was a heavy-looking backpack. Her hair was long and dark, slightly disheveled, and she looked out of place. The strangest part was her being there at that hour. I slowed down and pulled up beside her, asking if she needed help. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice slightly trembling. The air around us felt heavy, almost suffocating. She looked at me with tired eyes and nodded. "That's my school over there," she said, pointing towards the dark path ahead. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Can you give me a ride? It's dangerous for me to walk alone at this hour." There was something about her, maybe it was her calm demeanor or the way she looked so vulnerable, that made it impossible for me to refuse. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually, I nodded. "Sure, hop on," I said, trying to sound reassuring. She climbed onto the back of my bike. The weight of her backpack made the bike heavier, but I didn't think too much of it. As we rode, I noticed the road seemed darker than before, and the air felt colder, almost as if we were entering another world. The wind that had been gently whispering now seemed to howl, and I could feel the uneasiness building inside me, but I kept going, focusing on getting her safely to her destination. After a few minutes, she spoke again, her voice almost lost in the wind. "You know, not many people stop to help strangers at night," she said softly. I forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. "Well, I guess I'm just a good Samaritan," I replied, though deep down, I felt an uneasiness I couldn't shake. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her reflection flicker, as if she wasn't really there. "You're kind," she said, her voice trailing off. There was a strange sadness in her tone, something that made my heart ache. I wanted to ask her more, but something told me not to. We continued down the road in silence, and I couldn't help but notice how dark and desolate everything seemed. The streetlights that were once frequent had become sparse, and the dim light they emitted seemed to do little to push back the darkness. The further we went, the more isolated I felt, as though we were leaving the real world behind and entering a place where time stood still. "This is it," she suddenly said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I looked around, confused. There was nothing but darkness and a construction site in the distance. No school, no buildings, nothing but an empty lot with rubble and debris scattered around. "Are you sure this is the place?" I asked, turning my head to look at her. My gut told me something was wrong. The air felt thicker, and the sense of unease was almost unbearable. But when I turned back, she was gone. The seat behind me was empty. The girl had vanished without a trace. Panic started to settle in. My hands began to shake, and I felt my heart pounding against my chest. "What the?" I muttered, my heart pounding as I looked around frantically. There was no sign of her anywhere. The road was empty, and the night was silent, save for the rustling of the wind through the trees. I could feel my breathing quicken, and I knew I had to get out of there. I sped home as quickly as I could, my heart pounding the entire way. The world around me seemed to blur, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching me. The shadows seemed to grow longer, almost as if they were reaching out for me. By the time I reached home, I was drenched in sweat, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys to unlock the door. The next morning, I convinced myself it had to be a nightmare, a product of my tired mind. But when I reached into my pocket, I found a small note. The message read, "Thank you for bringing me back to my old school. It may no longer be there, but it's still home to me." Chills washed over me again as I remembered the construction site. People said it used to be an old private school that had shut down years ago after a tragic accident involving a teacher. I could still feel the weight of her presence on my bike, the coldness that seemed to seep into my bones. The teacher, Could it have been her? I whispered to myself, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I couldn't help but replay every moment of that night in my head, trying to make sense of what had happened. The way she spoke, the sadness in her eyes, it all pointed to something that went beyond the natural world. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I even went back to the construction site, hoping to find some clue, some explanation that would put my mind at ease. But all I found was an empty lot, covered in gravel and machinery. I asked around the neighborhood, and an elderly man told me that the school had been abandoned after the tragic accident involving a young teacher who had died on the premises. He said she had been dedicated to her students, and that she had loved the school more than anything. She must have been the one, I thought, my heart heavy with a mix of fear and sympathy. I often wonder if she ever found peace, or if she's still out there, wandering those empty roads, looking for a way back to what she once called home. One night, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to visit the area again. This time, I brought a small flashlight and a camera, hoping to document anything unusual. As I approached the construction site, a strange sense of familiarity washed over me, as if I had been there countless times before. The air was still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I reached the edge of the site, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing twisted metal and broken bricks. Suddenly, I heard a faint voice, a whisper carried by the wind. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned in the direction of the sound. There, in the dim light, I saw a figure. It was her, standing at the edge of the construction site, her white dress flowing in the breeze. She looked at me, her eyes filled with the same sadness I remembered. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand and pointed towards the old foundation of the school. I followed her gesture, my flashlight revealing a small rusted plaque partially buried under the debris. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt to read the inscription. It was a dedication to the teacher who had lost her life there. Her name was etched into the metal, along with a message of gratitude from her students. When I looked up, she was gone. The air around me seemed to grow colder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. It was as if her spirit had been tied to this place, unable to move on because of the memories that lingered here. I whispered a silent prayer, hoping that she could finally find peace. To this day, I can't shake that experience from my mind. I often think about that night, wondering if she ever found peace, or if she still roams those empty roads, looking for a way back home. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm riding down a dark road, I catch myself glancing at the side of the road, half expecting to see her there, waving at me once again. The memory of her eyes, filled with both hope and sorrow, stays with me, a reminder that some souls are forever bound to the places they loved. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through one of the most unforgettable nights of my life. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Who knows what other eerie encounters lie ahead? Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.